Today on SCIENSTORICAL, I'm jumping on the Christmas episode bandwagon. And what better way to celebrate Christmas than to talk about Michael Faraday? I am 2 kilometers away from the sun, and I'm wearing a Santa hat. Let's do this! I hope you don't mind, but I'm actually going to multitask through this episode because I'm getting a bit behind on making all of my Christmas decorations. So I thought I would have a go at recreating something I saw on Pinterest, which is, of course, a smart thing to do. If you want to follow along, all I'm using are some neodymium magnets. These are also called rare earth magnet. I have some copper wire, a battery, some wire cutters, and I should have some pliers, but I've got a screwdriver. I also have no artistic talent. Trying to pretend that this is not connected, but it is. Michael Faraday was born in 1791 to a really common family in England. Now, it might seem a little bit discriminatory of me to mention that, but it was actually really important. In those times, science was really the pursuit of the gentleman. If you were born into a common family, like Michael Faraday was, then you had no chance of ever becoming a scientist. Essentially, science was the purview of the rich, because they were the ones that could afford to go to Oxford and Cambridge to study. What even am I making right now? Faraday went to school for a little while, enough to learn how to read and write, and to do basic maths. Faraday then found himself apprenticed to a bookmaker. Now, to say that Faraday was a bright kid would be the understatement of the century. He was so ambitious and keen to learn, but he didn't really have very much opportunity to, until he found himself apprenticed to that bookmaker and found himself surrounded by books. And so, in his spare time, Faraday read. One day a gentleman came into the store and got chatting to Faraday, and he was really impressed by the young man. He seemed to know an awful lot more than he should for a lowly bookmaker. And shush, crow! Really? Anyway, impressed by Faraday's knowledge, this guy gave him a couple of tickets to go and see a couple of lectures at the Royal Institution, not to be confused with the Royal Society of London. They're two completely different things. So Faraday went along, and he was lucky enough to hear a lecture given by Sir Humphrey Davy. Now, Davy was a little bit of a rock star. I'm not even kidding. He was even into drugs. Davy used to inhale laughing gas and ether before he went on stage to do his lectures. At the moment, I kind of feel like maybe this would be made better by some laughing gas, because this is looking awful. What even is this? Faraday ate up every single word that Davy said. So much so that he wrote them down, essentially word for word, including pristine diagrams. He wrote them down in a book, bound it, because remember, apprenticed to a bookbinder, and then presented them to Davy. Faraday wanted to better himself, and he felt like the only way to do that, the only way to escape his boring trade, as he found it anyway, was to get into science. And he felt that was what he was called to do. So when Davy looked at his book and said, "Yeah, this is great, but you seem a little bit common, maybe you should stick to a trade," Faraday was a little bit crushed. But fast forward to a horrific accident in Davy's laboratory involving chlorine and explosions, and Davy suddenly found himself blind in one eye and in need of an assistant. And so he hired Faraday. Look! It's a Christmas tree! I think. Oh, okay. Maybe it needs more work. Now, around about this time, electricity had been recently discovered and described, and Faraday was fascinated by the stuff, as were most of the scientific community at the time. Now, a Danish scientist had recently described electromagnetism, particularly this effect where if you put a compass next to an electrical wire, the compass needle gets deflected at right angles. Now, Davy and one of his colleagues were trying to recreate the effect and see what they could do with it. And Faraday had his own ideas, but remember, he was born a commoner, and so Davy and this other gentleman scientist kind of went, "Yeah, I don't really want to listen to you. Go away. I don't like your ideas." And so Faraday kind of went, "Well, meh, I'm going to go and do my own experiments." And he discovered what's now known as a homopolar motor. Now, Faraday didn't use a 9-volt battery because they hadn't obviously been invented in the 1800s, and he also used mercury instead of salt water to conduct the electricity around the magnet. But the principle is exactly the same. What's happening here is that all the electrical current is flowing through the copper, and when it gets down to the magnet has also a magnetic field around it, and that deflects that copper wire in a circle. It's a little bit more complex than that, but I will link below where I got the schematics to make this. There's a really cool video that you guys can go and check out. This motor is the principle behind every single electrical motor in existence today. And actually this little tree that I'm making is also a homopolar motor. Oh, 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 yes! This is so cool. When Faraday published his findings in 1821, he forgot one very important thing. He entirely forgot to acknowledge his boss, Sir Humphrey Davy. Whoops! Considering Sir Davy had quite a lot of clout within the Royal Institution, Faraday was in a little bit of trouble. The higher-ups in the institution politely asked him to maybe go and work on something else, and so Faraday kind of turned his attention to developing lead glass, as you do. It was also around about this time that Davy decided to work on something else. He recognised that he would never have been able to get to where he was if it weren't for the Royal Institution and the lectures. At the time there was really nothing for children, and so he founded what's called the Christmas lectures. These are a series of 6 lectures that run predictably at Christmas, and it's also why this episode is all Christmas related. Yay! Every year since 1825, with the small exception of a break during World War II. I feel like that was understandable. London was a little bit bombed to some extent. 6 lectures have been held around Christmas time, and these lectures have covered everything from fireworks to microbes to robots to waves and vibrations, even time travel. The BBC started broadcasting them, and since then they've reached millions of people worldwide. If you go to the Royal Institution website, you can watch them, and I highly recommend it. They're really fascinating. Faraday himself went on to host them 19 times. Faraday's last series of lectures and demonstrations around the history of a candle flame was published, and it's actually still in print today. Faraday's known today mainly for his innovations in electricity and electromagnetism, but he's also the father of modern science communication. I'll leave links to all of the things that I made today down in the description box if you want to check them out. If you do make some of these wonderful little homopolar motors, make sure that you send me a photo. You can find me on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and on Snapchat. I'd love to see pictures of your creations. Hopefully, they're a little bit better than this one. I recommend using jeweler's pliers if you can get them. I didn't have a pair. It was very sad, so it's a bit wonky. But hey, that's alright. You can see what it is, right? I mean, I did tell you. So hopefully it's recognisable as a Christmas tree. I tried to make a star last night. It did not go well. I ended up with a circle. This is what I call a bauble.